I have to pee. Well, I'm not in a new spot today. I'm in a new angle. Always. Always being lazy. Always just being cozy. I matched my background really well. This is like pleasing to watch, like to look at, you know. I'm just a pleasing person to look at. What is wrong with me tonight? I'm in the weirdest mood ever tonight. I'm sorry. I have another scary story for you guys. This is going to be part 3 to Jack and Lucy. I'm going to separate this into 4 parts, so the next part will be tomorrow. These sections are just so long. I don't want to overwhelm you guys with 40-minute videos, so it is going to be the last 2 parts in the next 2 days. So this is part 3 to my series, but part 9 to the story of Jack and Lucy, a stalker in love with a murderer. 8 o'clock a.m. Man, I hate mornings. My day started as it usually did. I got up unwillingly and headed straight to the bathroom to take a cold shower. Afterwards, I brushed my teeth, made breakfast, and then my day could officially begin. However, today wasn't simply any other day. No, today was the day I'd find out who the intruder was. Today was the day I'd make the first step towards freeing myself from this hell. I spent the entire morning planning my approach. How was I going to deal with the situation if I didn't find my father's records at the police station? That would mean he was the intruder. And if so, how would I be able to kill a man that knows about my secret? I tried to filter out all the paranoia that sailed endlessly through my mind, only focusing on the important question to which I required answers. Furthermore, there was one other thing that really bugged me. Why didn't Lucy come to school yesterday? Though what irritated me even more so was that she didn't bother to contact me. She didn't call me, and I received no text message from her saying she was ill. 14:10 p.m. I made up my mind to go visit Lucy. I'm not really sure why it bugged me so much that she hadn't informed me about skipping school. Maybe I just got really attached to her. Huh, how strange, right? A murderer in love with a stalker. Anyways, I got dressed, packed some necessary items in my car, and headed to Lucy's house. Amongst those necessary items was a flashlight, a knife, and a handgun that my mother kept in her closet in case of an emergency. On my way to Lucy's house, while listening to music, I started to feel kind of nostalgic. It was a rather beautiful morning. The birds sang in perfect harmony, and though there were clouds in the sky, they were illuminated by the glistening light of the sun. It gave the sky type of disco ball feel. I started to recall some of the wonderful memories I had of Lucy and I, which put a warm smile on my face. In a way, every time I went to Lucy's house, it felt like I was going home after a long trip abroad. How strange. 14:55 p.m. I arrived at Lucy's place, pulling into her empty driveway. Her parents usually kept their cars parked in their garage, so I could never tell if they were home or not. Nevertheless, I rang the doorbell to see if they were. After about a minute, Lucy's mother opened the door to greet me. She seemed oddly surprised by my sudden appearance, and even asked if something had happened to me. I told her nothing was wrong, and that I just wanted to hang out with Lucy. I was kindly welcomed in, but that's when something strange happened. While I was taking off my shoes, Lucy's dad greeted me. "Hey Jack, how you doing?" he said enthusiastically. "Oh, fine, thanks Mr. Thompson. And you?" I'm okay, as usual. Wife can be annoying from time to time, though," he jokingly exclaimed, receiving a soft punch on the shoulder from Mr. Thompson. That's when the strangeness occurred. Mr. Thompson then asked, "So, how's your mom doing lately? She seems to be quite the busy woman." He giggled, throwing me off guard with how casually he brought up the question. "Oh, she's doing fine as well, I guess. She's at work a lot, so we don't really get to spend much time together," I replied. In that moment, I hadn't truly grasped the awkwardness of that question, probably because of how casually he had inserted the question into our brief conversation. Why was this so weird, you ask? Well, firstly, I'd only ever briefly brought up my mother in a conversation. What's more, I don't ever remember telling him anything about my mother's busy work life. I brushed off my suspicions as it merely being a coincidence. There was really no point in overthinking something so unimportant, right? Then they told me Lucy was in her room and that if I needed anything, I should just give him a call. Upon entering Lucy's room, I saw her talking to someone on the phone. I must have interrupted a private conversation because as soon as she recognized me, she hung up, rather hastily. "I'll call you back later," were her rushed last words, if I remember correctly. "Hey Jack." She threw her phone onto the bed and skipped over to me, embracing me affectionately. Her hugs always seemed to brighten my day. It was like being hugged by 1,000 cute little puppies. Honestly, it almost made me forget why I was there in the first place. After a bit of small talk and the usual pleasantries, I got straight to the point of my visitation. 15:20 p.m. "Lucy," I asked sternly, "I have a couple of things on my mind that I want to talk to you about, and that's the reason I'm here." "Oh, okay, shoot." Her eyes enlarged with curiosity. "Firstly, I believe we're close enough to be able to talk to each other about anything, right? I asked, somewhat hesitantly. Well, I'd hope so. Her face colored in a rosy tint as she blushed. I mean, I did tell you my darkest secret, and we both know about each other. I silently laughed in relief. Okay, well, the thing is, you remember... My mind paused. Something was off. I couldn't let the words out. It was like they were clinging for life against the edge of my tongue. Is something wrong, Jack? Lucy asked, concerned by my abrupt self-interruption. My words managed to find their way back to me. However, I wasn't so sure if I should ask all the things I wanted to. You see, I've never told anyone this before, but I have this strange ability of sorts. It's kind of like a safety mechanism that's ingrained in my subconscious. I guess you could say it's similar to that little voice you hear in your head that warns you to stop while you're ahead. For me, it's usually a sudden stoppage of movement or speech. It's basically an intuitive warning, telling me to rethink what I'm about to do or say, because it could have dangerous consequences. With this in my mind, I quickly decided on a different approach. My safety mechanism didn't want me to talk to Lucy about the intruder. Why? Well, I had no idea. Still, I had a question that needed answering. 15:45 p.m. Lucy, why didn't you come to school yesterday? The tone in my voice shifted the atmosphere of the room. Everything became tense, and although she retained a smile plastered on her face, it was like we were in one of those dark government interrogation cells. Yesterday, well, I was actually quite sick for some weird reason. She giggled in an attempt to lower the tension in the room. I stayed in bed the whole day. I couldn't even get up, to be honest. You stayed in bed? I added right away, barely allowing her time to take another breath. Yeah, I was really sick, I guess, but are you sure you're okay, Jack? She replied, confused at my uncharacteristic behavior. You seem stressed out. Did something happen? I answered by telling her I was just feeling a little edgy myself. A moment of silence ensued, only adding more tension to the room. Lucy put on an embarrassed facade, but my predator instinct sniffed her act right out. She was definitely hiding something. I wonder if it had something to do with that phone call. But what had struck me the hardest was what she had said. I stayed in bed the whole day. Those words were pure lies. Yesterday, I'd spent some time watching her from a distance, while she sat in her living room with her dad and her mother and made them something to eat. They appeared to have been talking about something, and Lucy seemed perfectly fine. I couldn't wrap the situation around my head. Why would Lucy blatantly lie to my face? What freaked me out the most was how easily she was able to lie to me, like it was absolutely nothing. I stayed at Lucy's place for a while, so not to ignite any suspicion. But in reality, I was so creeped out that I just wanted to run right out of the house. 19 p.m. Once I had spent more than enough time with Lucy to make my departure look as unsuspicious as possible, I said my goodbyes and headed out. That was the first time Lucy had lied to me, or at least the first time I caught her in the act. But what was she hiding? Why would she lie to me about being sick? It made no sense. Nonetheless, I didn't have time or luxury to contemplate about such little things. At 11:30, I would have to meet up with the man who was causing me all this trouble in the first place. Though before that, I still had an unofficial appointment with the police station. I needed to get my hands on my father's file. I needed to know if he was the intruder or not, to help me understand who I was dealing with. With every bone in my body anxiously chattering as I got into the car to drive to the police station, I mentally prepared myself for the worst. If those files weren't there, then the intruder was my father. And although I never really knew him, I would then most likely have to kill the single most important man in my life. 21:48 p.m. Shit. I overestimated my time management. On the way to the station, I stopped at a drive-in to get something to eat, and then went home to take what should have been a short nap. I must have let the time phase right through my thoughts. The police department closes at 22 p.m., meaning I wouldn't have long to search for my father's file. I hurried to the police station's front office, where I was greeted by one of the officers I knew personally, Officer Daniels. He was second only to the sheriff and a longtime friend of my mother, though they hadn't really talked much after high school. Officer Daniels was one of the police officers in charge of guarding my house back when I had to stay at Lucy's place for a month because of the intruder. He was kind and relaxed. His laid-back attitude made it very easy to ask him for help. Everyone in our little town knew and loved him. He was like everyone's cool uncle. "Hey Jack, what's up?" he greeted me. "You look like you're in a rush." After catching my breath, I began to explain my situation. Obviously, I left out the important things, and also ended up having to lie about why I wanted to see my father's documents. I told him it was out of curiosity, and that I wanted to at least know my father's name. It was after hearing me out that Officer Daniel's blue eyes went pale. His facial expression emitted sadness, like he was about to give me some terrible news. He sighed. I guess the day was eventually gonna come. Huh? What do you mean? What day? I was confused, and it showed in how I tightened my forehead, producing a steely look in my face. She never told you, did she? Never told me what? You're not making any sense here. I'm sorry, Jack. Your dad, he died many years ago. You were too young to remember, though. My eyes widened in grief. What? No, he died? Why didn't anyone ever tell me about this? My head began to shiver like some kind of drug addict. I looked up at Officer Daniel's face. He wasn't lying. In fact, he was dead serious. Actually, now that I remember clearly, I believe your father's death was a strange case, he continued to explain. According to reports, he had been abducted. However, we weren't even sure if that was the case. Only his decapitated left arm was found. He then proceeded to tell me that there was a large search party that had been sent out for him. The search lasted for about a month until everyone had given up. My mother was so distraught that she refused to leave the house in my side. According to Officer Daniels, the case remained open even to this day. 22 p.m. Well, I'm sorry, kid. I shouldn't have been the one to have to tell you. The department's closing up now. I think you should head home and get some rest. Don't let it weigh on your mind too much. You're still too young to stress over such things. My hands clenched tightly together as I had listened to every word he said with an unwavering attention. What about his documents? My father must have had some kind of files left over, right? An angst-filled grin plagued my face as I asked the only question there was left to ask. Once again he sighed, this time in a sympathetic manner. I'm really sorry, Jack. Along with your father, all of his records vanished, including the digital ones. We left the station together and Officer Daniels closed up. Before I could leave to go to my car, he left me with one more valuable piece of information. Your dad, his name was Jack, too. He announced in a loud enough tone so that I would be able to hear from across the parking lot. Jack Belinsky, or as most called him, Sheriff Belinsky. 22:25 p.m. Man, my time management really is terrible. I was supposed to go home and come up with a backup plan. I guess it's too late now. Sitting in the dark of the night on a bench in the park with my gun in hand, I now anxiously waited for the intruder to show up. I'm not sure how much of this I can take anymore. I wonder if this is what it felt like to be lost. My father being dead meant that he couldn't be the intruder, and yet, worst of all, was the possibility that the intruder was the one who had killed him, and that now he was back to finish the job and kill me. I mean, if my father had been the sheriff, he would have definitely had some enemies. 2:29 p.m. In spite of everything, there remained one small thing that made me feel kinda happy. It was the fact that I shared the same name as my father. Sure, it didn't really mean much now, but it was nice that I had something of him. I'd have to thank my mom. Later. That's if I make it back alive. And then it was 22:30 p.m. I look at my phone and see that it's 22:30. It's time. My heart started to beat against my chest like a drum. It felt like my ribcage was going to crack at any moment. What should I say to the intruder? What if he doesn't show up? Could this be a trap? Questions upon questions ran rampant through my flustered mind. There have been times in my life where I closely evaded death, which were truly terrifying. I've seen some things that would make even the devil jump. But this is the one. I don't think I've ever been this scared. I quietly sit in the dark, scanning every corner of the park for any sign of movement. The minutes take forever to pass, and yet the intruder still hasn't showed up. Is he just toying with me? Do I go home? And then a disturbing thought strikes me down like thunder. What if I've really been tricked? The intruder could be at my house right now. My body went into a state of paralysis. I wanted to run home, but my body refused to heed my orders. My phone started to buzz, almost shocking me to death. I forced my arms to move and take my phone out of my pocket. I assumed it might be my mom calling, but when I looked to see who it was, an unknown number glared right at me. I've seen plenty of horror movies to know that it's not a good idea to answer an unknown number at night. However, to my annoyance, I had accidentally pressed accept call, knowing that there was no going back now. I held the phone to my ear and waited. A moment of silence followed, that seemed to take forever. And then, in a silent tone, a voice said, "This might hurt a little." I felt a hard thud against the back of my head before everything went black. Looks like I was tricked. I guess bringing a gun along was a lazy contingency plan. Time seemed like a lost concept, and I had no knowledge of where I was. The room in which I woke up was dark and looked kind of empty. My gun was gone, and so was my phone. In fact, that wasn't even the worst part. What was worse was that I had been bound to a chair in the middle of a room. Now, I'm not the type that's afraid of the dark. However, I couldn't help but keep turning my head to check if there was anybody behind me. My whole body was drowned in sweat, and the hit I had taken earlier made me feel drowsy. I wanted to call for help, but I knew, just like the victims I had kidnapped, no one was going to come for me. After a little while, a door opened. It was so dark, I hadn't even seen that there was a door straight ahead from where I was placed. I did my best to try and make out the face of the figure that walked in. However, it was no use. The room was too dark. About 4 figures had entered the room. 3 of them started to walk up to me, while the others stayed in the background. And then, in a flash, the lights were turned on. The brightness temporarily blinded me, forcing me to briefly shut my eyes and look away. Honestly, I wish I had kept my eyes shut. As I turned around to look at my kidnappers, my insides collapsed. There, right in front of me, they stood. Mrs. Thompson, Mr. Thompson, and the intruder next to him. In the background stood Lucy, with a guilty look on her face. My breathing became heavier as I tried to control my head from bursting. I was confused beyond all hope. No, 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 I pleaded. This is a dream, right? A bad dream. I must be dreaming. Tears began to flow down my cheeks as I lowered my head in shock. And the intruder spoke. Jack, I know you must have a lot of questions. Try to breathe steadily, and we'll do our best to answer all of them. A nervous laugh escaped my mouth as I looked up at them. Fine then. Who the fuck are you? And why are you doing this to me? The intruder and Mr. Thompson looked at each other and nodded. And then slowly but surely, the intruder began to take off his mask. As the mask fell to the ground, my eyes stared straight at the intruder's face. I was now even more confused than before. It wasn't that there was anything wrong with his face. In all truth, I had half expected him to look like a monster with scars all over and sharp, gruesome teeth. But the person who stood in front of me, now unmasked, looked like a regular guy. However, that wasn't the reason my eyes remained fixed on his face. Somewhere, though I couldn't remember where and when, I had seen that face. Huh, am I that weird looking that you have to stare so harshly, little brother? My eyes enlarged, stunned by my own disarray. What did you just say? I asked, not believing what my ears just heard. You heard me correctly, little brother, he answered. Although I can understand why you wouldn't remember me, that demon that has been tampering with you for so long, I only wish I had done something sooner. That demon? What the hell are you talking about? Huh. Well, since you're only able to come up with vague questions, I'll just have to explain the situation to you. His voice sounded composed. I knew that what he had to say wouldn't be lies. I saw you at the police station today, and if I had to guess, you were probably searching for Dad's documents, right? Well, unfortunately, you won't find anything because they no longer exist. He then continued to explain everything to me. Once he had finished talking, I felt exhausted, not in body or mind, but in soul. He had started his story from the very beginning, and every word that left his mouth hit me like a sharp blade. Before you were old enough to remember, we used to live together, he explained. Our parents moved to this small town in the hopes of starting a new, peaceful life. Our dad became the town sheriff and was adored by everyone. I wish I could end the story there and tell you that our father died of some natural cause, but I can't. I'm sure you've heard about that urban legend about the serial killer who was so brutal that sometimes the victims couldn't be identified as human beings at first sight, he asked. I nodded in reply, allowing him to continue. Well, you see, it wasn't an urban legend. During the time our family had moved to this town, that sadistic serial killer started their murder streak. Our father and the other policemen had done everything in their power to try and catch the killer, but they only found death and despair in their efforts. I was only a kid back then, so I didn't really think much about it, but if I had known what I know now, maybe things would have turned out differently. Disturbed by everything I had just heard, I asked, what do you mean, if you had known back then? My curiosity had once again started to get the best of me. I wanted to know the truth. I needed to know. The killer, he took a deep breath before finishing. The killer was that demon you call Mother. The hairs on my skin stood up and my spine began to itch. He then continued the story. Back then, I had noticed some weird things about her that I couldn't explain. Our dad worked until very late, sometimes even sleeping over at the station, and when he was gone, I would notice she wasn't home either. His tone changed. I could feel his anger and fear like a hand gripping my face. I remember one time getting up at about 1 in the morning to go to the bathroom. As I got up, I heard a faint noise coming from downstairs. I crept down to go check it out, and what I saw made my body freeze. That demon was cleaning up blood and human remains from the floor, and next to her, playing with a decapitated hand, was you. He gulped the air down his throat. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson looked away, not able to cope with the horror of the story. She didn't see me that night, but it didn't matter, because what I had seen could not be erased from my memory. After that, I couldn't even bear to see that woman's face. It was like looking at the devil. What was even worse was that every time I looked at your little innocent face, I felt saddened. I always knew she had a special love for you, but what she was doing with you was wrong. He paused for a second to regain his composure before going on. Long story short, eventually our father had also caught on to her weirdness. And as you already know, things didn't end well for him. Our dad went missing, and after a long search, all they had found was an arm. She didn't seem sad at all, and that's when I knew she had killed him. He paused once again, this time to stare up at the ceiling, a single tear sliding down his face. I was only a kid. I didn't know what to do. I mean, how do you tell on your own mother? The same woman that feeds you and clothes you, tucks you into bed at night. I didn't know what to do, so I ran. I ran away from home. Lowering his head to look at me again, he carried on. I didn't get far, though, before Mr. Thompson saw me. In my fear and helplessness, I told him everything I knew. However, Mr. Thompson was a step ahead. You see, before he became a doctor, he worked for the police with our dad. They were pretty much best friends, and so when he had heard of what had happened, he wanted to find the killer, and, well, Mr. Thompson stepped forward to speak. Sorry. He apologized for interrupting. I know this must be tough for you, Jack, but we mean you no harm. Your mother is a killer, and back then I had more than enough reason to believe so. Now you're probably wondering, why now? Why tell me after all this time? Well, it's kinda complicated, but we tried to get your mother arrested once before. However, we lacked the evidence and our story wasn't compelling enough. Your brother's been living with us for all this time, and he hasn't been stalking you, but rather observing you. You see, we know about your killings, Jack. My bones turned to ice. All of my theories went out the window. But don't worry, he proceeded with a smile on his face. It's not your fault. You've been manipulated by her. Think of it like hypnosis. So, then what do you want from me? Why are you putting me through this? I asked, my heavy breathing starting all over again. Mrs. Thompson's sweet voice intervened as she got on her knees and held my hand. Listen, Jack. I know she's your mother, and no one deserves to go through what you're going through right now, but we need your help. What she's been doing to you and others is wrong. You're not safe around her. Basically, what we're trying to say is that you being the closest to her, you have to get her to admit her crimes. We need you to record her confession. You're our last hope, Jack. We need you, bud, my brother added. At this point, I barely even felt alive anymore. My mother? Why would she do this? It's not my fault. All those people I'd killed was because of her manipulating me? I gave in, no longer able to take the torture of the harsh truth I was confronted with. I agreed to help them. Moments after having apologized for everything they'd put me through, and also for having me kept in the dark for so long, they left the room. And then Lucy walked over to me and bent down to untie me. As I watched her release me from my bonds, one question still loomed in my mind. The night I told you the truth about who I was, you told your parents, didn't you? There was no reply. She simply continued to untie me. So you did, didn't you? I could see the guilt painted all over her face. You know, I thought you were different. My whole life I've hated people, despised them for being happy with this pathetic world. I thought I was all alone, and then I met you, my precious Lucy. I wanted to believe that you were my remedy, that maybe, just maybe, there was someone in this world who understood me. Uncontrollable tears flowed down our faces simultaneously, and yet she remained silent. I stood up after having been untied. Lucy remained on the floor, crying. I guess I was wrong. You're just a spy. You never loved me. You just used me. And I never would have imagined it. I paused. An awkward silence captured the room. You didn't kill Amy, did you? She shook her head, still crying silently. So I'm guessing it was my mother, huh? You know, I never did ask you to the dance, but I guess it's no longer a part of your job to pretend to like me. Goodbye, Lucy. I left the room, leaving her behind. Once I had left, I could hear her cries, but there was no point in turning back. I'm a killer, a murderer. I don't get to fall in love. Mr. Thompson and my brother told me to take it easy, that the stalking was over now, and that they would inform me as soon as possible when they came up with a plan. But I couldn't care less. Once again, I found myself in that lonely place I had been trapped in before I met Lucy. My life didn't matter anymore. I left their house for the last time and headed home to confront my mother. They confiscated my gun, but that didn't matter either. I looked at my phone. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. I stood in front of my house. I felt poised, like I'd regained my strength. Whatever happened from this point on would only happen because I chose it to be that way. And with a concentrated mind, a fierce look in my eyes, and a broken heart, I opened the door, walked inside, ready to face the devil. And that is all I'm going to read today. The finale will be tomorrow. My camera's going to die, but I hope you guys enjoy. I fucking love this story so much. It's like a roller coaster of emotions for me, and I can't take it. But I love you guys. I'll see you in the next one. Bye. I've decided to not create this. And although she retained a supply, I looked at my phone and see that it's 22:30. Alright, cool. I am a teenage boy going through puberty. Welcome to my life. Welcome to my channel. Siri.
Okay, give me a moment. Okay, I found something on the web for Australian thought strokes me down with under. Take a look.
No thanks. And then a disturbing thought strikes me down like thunder. Siri. I hadn't even seen that there was a door straight ahead from where I would... Before he became a doctor, Siri. How do I make my phone stop going dark? Because I've done it before to where it doesn't go dark, but I've checked everything and I can't find it. Display and brightness. Oh my god, I'm so dumb. Oh, it's because I have like the low battery thing on. That makes sense. Oh, okay, well, let's plug my phone in. Here, buddy. Oh my god, I almost just broke my light. Oh my god, rest in peace, buddy. Oh, she's okay. She ain't dead, but I just like to remember her. Oh my fucking god. Honestly, what is my life right now? I just wanted to plug my phone in so that my phone wouldn't turn dark, but whatever. Alright, this is turning out to be a really shitty start to my vid. Watch it just fall on me in the middle of the fucking video. Honestly, hope it does.